We are up to the moment in Parshat Toldot in Perek Chav Zayin, Pasuk Yud Dalid, really, where Yaakov Avinu agrees, somewhat reluctantly, to get what his mother has asked him to get, which is the 2 kids that will be made into the tasty food, the delectables for Yitzchak Avinu, so that he will give the bracha. One of the commentators points out, and I'm trying to remember now who it is, I've seen it over Shabbos, that in Pasuk Yud Bet, verse 12, when Yaakov says, Ulai yemusheni avi, maybe my father will feel me, meaning he will discern that it's really me, through the sense of touch. If the issue was lest he find me out, that would have been the word pen, nun. But the fact that it used the expression ulai sounds almost, I forgot already who said it. I want to get caught, like I'm sort of half hoping that this doesn't work, right? Esav is an ish sa'ir, v'anochi ish chalak. He's hairy, I'm smooth. So now that he brings what he was asked to bring, he does not know that his mother will take into account that possibility to allay his concern that he will be felt out. How will that be allayed? With the clothing. Vayelech, vayikach, vayave, li'imo, vatas imo matamim, kasher ahev aviv. She made it into the food as his father loved to eat. And Rashi here points out, some of the versions of Rashi have, that the taste of a kid, depending how you cook it, will taste just like a deer, just like venison. We talked about this extensively last shir, and a lot to say from the world of Medrash. On the level of Pshat, these were special clothes that Esav had, and they were in the house with Rivka. She put them on to Yaakov, the Midrashim describing variously. These were the special clothes that Esav would wear when he served his father. Midrashim extolling the virtue of Esav in as much as he was terrific at Kibud Av, or other things he was not as good at, but that he was good at. And other Midrashim that we discussed also, that this was somehow the coat that had a great story to it, a great history, and the reality that it was now being used for this purpose. We'll come back more to that in a couple of minutes. Give me a couple more minutes just to do a few more psukim. He wears the disguise on his arms, on his neck. We learned that it's not just the meat, but there's also going to be some kind of bread that's going to be consumed. They're making it into Sudas mitzvah, so it also has bread. Yeah. Not what Yitzchak asked for. Remember, he asked his son to go get the hunt and bring it back. Was it implied there would be bread? We'll see soon if there'll be bread when Esav comes in as well. Vayavo el aviv. Now it comes in. Vayomer avi. Vayomer hineni. Ma'ata mi'ata b'ni. In one pasuk, the number of times, and I said this at the shir on Shabbat in the afternoon, the number of times that the words av or ben, father or son, or more precisely, avi or b'ni, go back and forth, had to have been a dagger in the heart of Yaakov, because he knows that the father who calls him fondly is not actually speaking about him, but about someone else. And also the idea of the confirmation. Is it you? Is it you? Why is he asking so many questions? Clearly, Yitzchak Avinu understands something is up. The fact that it's so fast, for all different reasons, but we don't hear about those reasons first. First, as he comes in, his father, is it some kind of premonition that something's wrong? It's not clear from the pshat, but just as soon as he comes in, Vayomer Avi, from the first word, right? So his father answers, Hineni, mi'ata v'ni. Hineni doesn't literally mean here I am in space, because obviously he came in to see his father. His father's the one who doesn't have sight. There's some communication here about, wanting to accentuate the fact that the very moment of hearing his own name called, Yitzchak Avinu hears his name called, already raises his antennae. Why, who is this? What voice is this? Vayomer Yaakov el Aviv. Yaakov didn't say it. he said it El Aviv, to his father. He came into his father. He spoke to his father. And what does he say? Anochi Esav b'chorecha. I am your son Esav, your firstborn Esav, actually. Siti kasher dibarta Elai, kumna shiva v'ochla mitzedi ba'avur tevarachani nafshecha. So I did as you spoke to me, not to someone else. Kumna shiva, variously understood as please sit up now. Please sit up and eat from the hunt, so that your bracha, you'll be able to give me the bracha. All right. So just in this first line, is it believed by Yitzchak? Not entirely. Vayomer Yitzchak el beno maze miharta limtso beni. What did you find? My son. I mean, normally when two people are speaking to each other, they don't say again, my father, my son, my father, my son, right? But that's exactly the point. What did you get? Vayomer ki yikra Hashem Elokecha lefanai. Again, that's a slip on Yaakov's part. Hashem caused this to come before me. It's not the way Esav talks, apparently, as we'll see shortly from his speech. We'll hear more from him when he comes into the room afterward. And Yitzchak doesn't believe it, or has some issue believing it. Vayomer Yitzchak el Yaakov gishana va'amushcha b'ni. Come over here. I want to touch you. Just as Yaakov had feared, exactly once. Ha'ata zeh b'ni Esav? Im lo? Are you really my son or not? Right? Vayigash Yaakov Yitzchak avi vayemushehu. So Yaakov goes near, and Yitzchak feels him. Vayomer, very famously, Hakol kol Yaakov vayadayim yedei Esav. The Ramban points out that Hakol kol Yaakov vayadayim yedei Esav. We already said it previously. It says, indeed, why is Yaakov worried about his father touching him? Should be worried the voice doesn't sound the same. So the Ramban gives two possible answers. A, they were, after all, twins, and therefore their voices sounded alike. Or B, Yaakov perhaps knew how to make himself sound like Esav, right? We would say a sharper, coarser, more brusque personality, but one that could speak with that Yaakov knew how to emulate. Except that he's saying things like, "Well, Hashem caused it to come before me. Give me 2 more minutes, everybody. I see all the lights lighting up over here with the hands and the notes. I want to get a little of the picture till we get to the bracha, so that we can actually have the conversation about, well, what about this and that? We already saw the pshat level, so bear with me. I'm just setting up more and more questions for everyone for the discussion. All right. So he feels him a kol kol Yaakov yadayim yedei Esav. Between those two things, which one is easier to put a disguise on, the voice or the hands? Okay, but v'lo hikiro, the Torah testifies, just so you realize, because I'm also tempted at this point in the story to say, well, of course Yitzchak really knows, but he's kind of playing along, wink, wink, nod, nod, except for the problem that it actually says v'lo hikiro. He did not recognize him. And you have to explain away those two explicit words in the Torah to say he didn't recognize what he had become, that he didn't recognize his son Yaakov, but he knew it was Yaakov. You'll have to make a case. And I think, given, 33 centuries since the Torah was given, I think you'd have to find something somewhere in a commentary that says he absolutely knew it was Yaakov and the whole thing was a ruse. He wasn't just playing along, so he could say to Esav after, I had no idea. And that was not true. That Yitzchak was really lying. You have to make a good case, because the two words here, verse 23, v'lo hikiro, ki hayu yadav ki yedei Esav achiv seirot. His hands were like the hands of his brother Esav, hairy. Vayevarchehu, and he blessed him. What is the blessing? Vayomer ata zeh b'nei Esav. Vayomer ani. No idea how to punctuate that. What is Vayevarchehu? And he blessed him. And he blessed him means what we're going to read in a few psukim, that he blessed him, or to give him a blessing over here. What blessing is it? Is the next verse the blessing? The blessing is that he said to him, you are my son Esav. Also, was that a question? Ha'ata zeh b'nei Esav or ata zeh b'nei Esav? I think the only way to punctuate it is with a question mark, but still, it's not ha'ata, are you, but ata zeh b'nei Esav. Vayomer, and he answers, ani. So we have an anochi and we have an ani. Vayomer, hagisha li v'ochla mitzeit b'ni, leman tvarecha nafshi. Vayagesh lo v'yochal v'yaveh lo yayin v'yesh. So he brings him the food, he eats, and he brings him wine, and he drinks it. It's not the end yet. You're thinking, well, it's the end. He listened to his voice and reconciled it with how he felt. He asked him twice already, are you? He answered him twice. I want to give you come over, let me give you a kiss. Why is a father asking his son for a kiss? Vayigash vayishaklo, vayarach et reach begadav, vayavarechehu. Vayomer. And here we have the bracha. What's the bracha? Here it seems more obvious. Re'each b'ni, karech sadeh shir bercho Hashem. See the, and who's Yitzchak talking to? To the audience? Lahavdol fe'avdalot? Who is Yitzchak talking to? To no one in particular? To Hashem? Is it just declarative? Vayomer, he just said. Re'each b'ni. See the scent. It's a mixed metaphor also. I forgot what it's called when you mix senses. No? I can't remember. Anyway, there's a literary term for it. Re'ei re'ach b'ni, kirech sadeh, I think a phasic, something like that. You're putting them, the two of them together. Kirech sadeh sher bercho Hashem, like the field of the scent of the field that Hashem has blessed.
The word is synesthesia.
What?
The word is synesthesia.
Thank you. Synesthesia. Thank you. I knew there was a thesia in there. Thank you. V'yitein l'chai elokim mital hashamayim v'shmani haaretz v'rov dagan v'tirosh. I'm skipping the bracha because we're going to have to learn that in depth another day. Yavducha amim v'shtachvu l'cha l'umim v'gvir l'achach v'shtachvu l'cha b'nei mecha u'recha arur u'v'rachecha baruch. Then v'yihi kasher kila Yitzchak l'varech Yaakov v'yihi ach yatzor yatzor Yaakov me'ipnei Yitzchak aviv v'yisav achiv ba mitzeido. One left and one arrived. That's the end. We're going to stop there. Now take some questions, comments, etc. And I pointed out already on Shabbos the name of Rav Itamar Eldar. It's worth repeating. It's amazing that so much of what happens from chapter 27 to the end of the parsha is always two people, lahavdil, but just to use it sort of to picture it for ourselves, two people on a stage together at any given time. At no time is everybody together in the room for one big family conversation. Yitzchak, Esav. Esav leaves. Then we cut to Yaakov, Rivka. Then Yaakov leaves Rivka to do what he has to do. Yaakov goes in to Yitzchak. They're together. Yaakov's going to leave. Esav's going to come in. Enter stage left. Yitzchak, Yaakov are going to have an interaction. Esav's going to leave. Rivka's going to come in. There's going to be a back and forth. The whole thing is going to be, then they're going to bring Yaakov in at last to send him off together. The two parents send him off. There's a whole back and forth, two people at any given time. Okay, I think the chats were first, so I'll give those priority. Won't Yitzchak notice the feed is his wife's recipe? Yeah, that's a great question, right? So either she knows how to cook like Esav, or like Rashi says, somehow the taste of the this is like the taste of the that. And since he can't see, he doesn't know how different it looks. Okay, questions, comments. Shelley, go ahead, please.
This is a methodology class, right? It's in the general, we're supposed to understand the different commentators.
The commentators, right.
Right. Okay. So my problem is with all of these different midrashim that basically conflict. What am I supposed to think? For example, last week, the business of Isaac being blind so he couldn't walk down the street, and then so people wouldn't tell him how bad Esau was, the Canaanites. Well, we've got these other midrashim that the Canaanites are such awful people that they do everything wrong. You can't marry into them. And so therefore they would have thought that Esau was great stuff. They wouldn't have thought that Esau's behavior was bad. They would have said, they would have clapped Yitzchak on the head.
Yeah.
And we're having the same thing with this now, with this too. Where I'm thinking of, the voices. Yaakov is, I'm sorry, he's just deceiving his father. Okay, you can say, well, he paused this sentence here, so he's not deceiving him. Esav is your Bechor, and I am me, and but it really doesn't work. It's they're deceiving him. So how can you have conflicting midrashim that you're somehow supposed to all fit together so that these people are all so saintly, which is a problem I've always had too, because they're human beings. Human beings make mistakes. That's our religion. We don't put them up on
Yeah. So let me answer your various points. They're, as usual, excellent and sharp. And each one is a class in of itself, except for the first thing you said, which is really what I'm pretty much talking about almost every single time I give a shir in Chumash, Parsha. The Midrashim do not all have to be reconciled with each other. What I've tried to explain variously in the various Parshiot, even in the Parsha Shavua class we're doing on Shabbat, but this shir especially, let's stop trying to figure out each time, asking the question, what historically happened when it comes to a medrash? Meaning, there are clearly midrashim that contradict each other. Leave aside assessments of great people and their possible errors, foibles, sins, etc. Just take something simple. We talked about this extensively when we were there. Just to give you a few examples where this comes up, how old are people in various stories is a crucial question, but it's not a crucial historical question. If it was, the Torah would have gone out of its way to tell us the age of so-and-so. And in fact, in many instances, it does, but sometimes it doesn't. Yitzchak Avinu could only be one age at the Akedah. He cannot be two ages, right? Yet the Torah never tells us how old he is. And you could say, well, that's a lacuna in the information the Torah gives us, and it's some kind of a signal that it's irrelevant. And that might be true. But the Chachamim are also based on the Psukim trying to understand, well, how old is he? You could make a great case he's 37. You can make a great case he's a very little boy. You can make a great case that he is a teenager. You have Mefarshei HaMikra and Midrashim that lean in all different directions. By having three different options, you allow more people to be able to connect, or maybe the same person to connect to the story on different levels. The story of the Akedah is not the same if he's 37 as it is if he's 5. And who the test is for is different depending on his age. That's one example. These examples abound. Sometimes they're just about an age. The age of Rivka at the well, the age of Rivka when she marries, the age of Rivka and Yitzchak as possibly an age gap that played into the dynamic of who did and didn't speak to each other. But the Torah doesn't actually tell us how old these people are. Sometimes we could figure it out. Sometimes we're actually saying we're figuring it out, but we're not entirely sure. How old is Yaakov in this story? If you and I would read this story just in a vacuum, I would say this guy is a teenager. He's a teenager. He is finding his way. He hasn't figured things out yet in his life. He's trying to learn how to be a human being. He got up, he fell down, etc. What do Chazal want to argue? He is 63. 63 years old. This is a person who's in his 60s and his twin brother's in his 60s, and they're fighting for daddy's and mommy's attention. Really? But there are midrashim in that direction, and you could build a cogent case that is the age. And maybe Chazal have a message in that about perhaps some of the dynamics from childhood, if they're unresolved, they keep playing out throughout, right? And Yitzchak is 123 years of age. The Torah doesn't tell us that explicitly. We can figure out possibly that he's that age. I don't think that it is fair to say that if you're a believing Jew, you must believe that the medrash that he's 123 is Minas Shamayim, is Misinai. I don't believe that. And I believe there's a fine Jew out there who says, absolutely, he was 123, and a fine Jew says he wasn't 123. Why is Yitzchak blind? Let's take that example. Right now, it's zeroing in now more content-based, not just about ages, but things where it really matters to how we understand the whole story. Why is Yitzchak blind? Answers abounded. He's old. That's what happens to people. And there are consequences to that reality of biological age. It's possible it was a result, maybe it's something causal to something that happened in the past, maybe as far back as the Akedah that is now playing out. The trauma of that had implications. It's possible he's blind because of the wives that Esav took. So whose fault is it that Yitzchak is blind and gives the bracha to the wrong person? Well, we could put some of the blame on Yaakov or Rivka or whatever, but you know what, Esav? That's why he's blind. And maybe the blindness is a metaphor, aside from actually being a condition, a metaphor for the blindness of Yitzchak to the realities of what happens in his own home, with his own children, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe the reason for his blindness, as troubling as it may be to us to hear, is causal, not for something that happened, but for something that's going to happen. He needs to be blind in order to make sure, and I don't understand how Hashem works in this world, that's why he's blind. Now, could you answer Neapolitan swirl? He's blind for all of these reasons? Yes, you could. You could reconcile all of them. You could say they're not contradictory. But Shelley, we don't have to take any one of those midrashim and say it's the historical reality or it's the view of the Torah. The expression of Ibn Ezra is very clear. One more sentence. Im Kabbalah nikabel. If it's a received tradition that this is what happened, and that's part of like the canon of the midrashic world that came to us from Mount Sinai, then we accept. V'im svara, but if it's only someone's opinion and interpretation that they gave, then I'm going to have license to disagree with it. But here's the rub. We don't know which midrashim are Misinai. It's like, here's the official commentary that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai, and we don't know which ones have an interpretive license to them. By way of analogy, in the world of halacha, these lines are much more sharply drawn. We have halachas that are called halacha l'Moshe Misinai. We have halachas that are attached to psukim because the psukim tell us what they mean. And we have halachas that are derived from verses. And then we have halachas that are really, I would say, interpreted or maybe using creative impulse and the legislative ability of the chachamim. And they attach it to a verse and they tell you that's what we're doing. In Medrash, all those trace lines of pencil, they've all been erased. Davka, they've been erased to open up the ability to understand things on multiple levels without, and there are people I know who want to reconcile every single Medrash. I'm with my Rebbe as the Rambam. He said they contradict each other and they're supposed to contradict each other. Live with it. You don't have to accept that each thing is the historical reality of what happened. So that's just to try to answer your first point. Shelley, you had something else to say? Can I go to your second point?
Yes, but you've told me a million times when I have an idea that it can't come out of in a vacuum. It can't come out just because I feel that in the 21st century it can be
right.
Good. It has to have a backing of some kind of tradition. Okay, well, that's very hard when the tradition contradicts itself like that. Now, you did answer my question in the sense that with a lot of midrashim, we don't know whether they came from Sinai or not, so we can get confused, and that's why they can get contradictory. But it can be all I'm saying is it can be very hard methodologically if you're trying to do it. And I can't help but think that the history has an awful lot to do with getting the correct answer of what it's supposed to mean. But I know you're saying that there's a lot of correct answers, but there's no correct answers coming out of a vacuum from the 21st century unless you're a very great scholar. The average thing that might work for somebody like me, you'll say is not good. If it's just,
but you understand these midrash. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but the midrashim are not flights of fancy. It's not like a rabbi was just sitting with his quill and his ink well and saying, "I just think this sounds nice." It is based on a plausible reading that fits with the verses themselves in some way. Again, unless it's a received tradition, we don't know the answer. And it is challenging to think of it this way methodologically. Which medrash is the correct one historically? The answer is it doesn't matter. It's still true. Why is it true? It's true because it's explaining to us a truth about what the story means, because it is the understanding of one of the greatest chachamim of the era of Chachamim Zichronim Livracha. It's one of the Parshanei HaMikra who have this vast understanding of what's transpiring. It is not and cannot be a flight of fancy. It's not porech ba'avir like we'll decide that we'll make up some medrash because I think they call it modern medrash. It's making it up. Lo yachol. You're betraying the notion of there being an actual story in the Torah Shebirtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. The point is, though, that the understandings of these things are not, the Medrash is not trying to tell you the historical backdrop every single time. There are other themes that it's trying to accentuate. Anyway, let me see if I can unpack this a little more for you as we go. But Karen's been waiting patiently, so go over to Karen, and then I want to show you something of Hirsch,
Okay.
which hopefully answers your second question. Karen, go ahead,
Now
please.
Now for something completely different. As I went through this entire episode, I was struck, you have 4 players, the 2 parents, the 2 kids. And it seems that the whole story is about the difference between the person that you present and the person inside. And so we're confused as we read through this, but I think that's intentional. I think we are also supposed to be confused about what's on the outside versus what's on the inside. I mean, you can go from that, everything from, in Hasidus, you have the animal side and the spiritual side, and all of those things are playing out in all of this, whether it's the blindness or the what does the food taste like, or the thing about son and father without the names. We're supposed to be confused about how they're presenting themselves versus what they're really thinking and their motivation inside is. And I think that's, for me, the big theme of the episode.
Thank you. That's terrific. Do we really know those that are closest to us? Do we know ourselves?
Right.
Struggling with that aspect of self. Yeah, what some would call the gap between authenticity and attachment to others in relationship. There's some writing on it, more contemporary writing on these issues. So I think these are absolutely all at play.
Right.
One of the
confusion we're seeing is intentional. We're supposed to feel that.
Right. For sure. And unlike Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak Avinu, earlier stories, where you'll have Parshanim who will say, that Ramban writes, Avram sinned here. He writes this in chapter 12 in Perek Yud Bet in Parshat Lecha, which I'm going to show you a piece now from Hirsch, because he was animated by this issue. By the time you get to the story of Yaakov Avinu, sorry, I forgot. In the days of Yitzchak Avinu, maybe there were some missteps. You hear there the king Avimelech upbraiding Yitzchak. Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? And he says, well, there's no fear of God in this play of word. You were going to kill me. Same playbook as Avram Avinu had when Avram Avinu had a tussle with Avimelech, the antecedent to the Avimelech in this story. And yet, when you get to the Yaakov story, this one that we're up to, the pendulum seems to swing in the other direction, meaning it's on the level of pshat. Just to read the story on the level of pshat is to tell a story about not knowing who people are, about issues of truth-telling and honesty, about people, call it maneuvering and making certain compromises. Now, I know you could say to me, well, what happened when Avraham and Sarah sent away Ishmael and Hagar? That's true. But you do recall that Hashem himself intervenes and tells Avram Avinu, listen to what your wife is saying. It's the right thing. Avram's reluctant, but Sarah, she's doing it. Now Rivka is doing what she needs to do. Hashem does not appear in this story to them overtly in a moment of prophecy. People are finding their way. And the pendulum swings now in the tone of this story. By the way, it's going to continue in a lot of the stories in Parshat Vayetze, where the Mefarshe HaMikra, some of them assume more of a defensive stance to defend the legacy of a Yaakov Avinu, of a Rivka Imenu, in contrast to what you see on the level of Pshat. And whereas in the other stories, we're willing to say, well, this was a mistake, this was a sin, etc. There seems to be like the pendulum swings the other direction. So to bring it back to the center, there's like almost, you could say, a certain compensatory effect that's going on. It's just worthy of consideration. I want to show you some things when you read, and to Shelley's point from before, I'll come to you in a second, Tamar, when you get to some of the things that are in Rashi's understanding of the story, some would want to argue is a whitewash of what actually transpired, while others will view it as a desire to understand the complete and total story in light of its consequences, and to not have us just on the level of pshat overly vilify Yaakov Avinu. Not everyone's going to agree with Rashi's approach, but it's instructive to hear his approach and to ask ourselves, did Rashi not learn the pshat? Did he not care what the pshat said? Or was there something in him that couldn't abide a story that would make it seem as if Yaakov Avinu, who is, after all, we're all the children, the Bnei Yisrael, children of Yaakov Avinu, that maybe we're descended of somebody who, didn't do right in this episode. And a pretty formative moment at that. So we'll have to understand it a little more in depth in a few minutes. Tamar, please, you're waiting patiently. Go ahead.
The story is full of puzzles. It's very puzzling. And for me, one of the big puzzles is if Yitzchak was so clearly suspicious and perhaps even convinced that Yaakov was in front of him and not Esav, why then did he go ahead and give the blessing?
Right. Verse 23, Pasuk Chav Gimel, Velohi Kiro. He didn't recognize him. I think at the end of all things, he suspected, he wasn't sure. Clearly, he's asking so many times, right? Because there's something strange here. Giving Yaakov every opportunity to say, Abba, it's me. And I was told to dress up this way, and he doesn't. His mother told him not to say, and he realizes he has to go along with it. But as we have discussed a number of times, there are clearly consequences to what happens here. Yaakov, the rest of Yaakov's life, things that play out as a result of this episode. When we read Rashi for us in our day, it's harder for us to relate to Rashi because of the moment in which we live. Not these Rashis, not Rashi in general, but Rashi on these psukim. To recognize that we're at a moment in world history where it is very much in vogue to try to show that people who are claimed to be great or have done great things or are somehow in the public eye are really not so. Oftentimes it turns out to be true, but oftentimes there's like a campaign to figure out who we can cancel.
Rabbi Engel,
Yes.
did any of the Mefarshim ask the question of, with all these suspicions, with Yaakov smelling like Esav and feeling like Esav and sounding like Yaakov.
Like Yaakov, yeah.
Yaakov said, you know what I'm trying to say. With all these, do the Mefarshim ask that question? Why then did he go ahead and give the blessing? He could have asked him to swear, for instance.
He could have. And the question is, on a certain level, maybe on a level that Yitzchak Avinu does not realize consciously, he's also kind of playing along. It's not clear. It's just not clear. Let's go further into the story to see if there is anyone who really thinks, who thinks that he really was, he knew it was him. We'll have to go further into the story. I don't think we're going to answer that story today because we're already rounding out the point, about just trying to reconcile what is Yaakov Avinu doing here? What has he been sent to do? What is Rivka cooked up on two levels? But we do have to come back to what's the level of awareness of Yitzchak. So I want to focus us for a couple of minutes. When you look at Rashi, even the very beginning in verse 19, it describes that he came in and he was asked, who are you, my son? Well, who do you think it was going to be? Smells the food, it's coming in. Right? Yaakov said this, Anochi Esav B'chorecha. How does Rashi read it? Right? Rashi very, very beautifully. Anochi I'm the one who's bringing it in, comma. Esav hu B'chorecha. Esav's your firstborn. All right. Asiti, I did what you told me to do. Asiti, kama dvarim kashuri, but I've done many different things in the past that you would ask me to do. All right. Right here, when you're reading it, you think a little bit like you're putting a comma in. Why is Yaakov acknowledging that Esav is the Bechor? I thought the whole story here is predicated on some level on Yaakov realizing that he bought the Bechorah. He deserves to have the Bechor bracha. Who brought up the idea of Bechor? Why did Yaakov bring it up? Rashi wants us to understand and to feel that that in some way Yaakov himself is engaged in some kind of, in the most charitable sense of the term, double speak, to sort of stay on the right side of things. That somewhere, if nothing else, Yaakov is halting in the language that he's using. Anochi, Esav bechorecha. I am I, but Esav is your firstborn. The technical understanding of this, which you can't hear, you have to see, of what this means is, you know what that is? You scratch your ear, you go like this. What does the pshat say? He said, I'm his firstborn. Rashi didn't see the pshat. Rashi saw the pshat, but there's something here about trying to reconcile, but this is Yaakov Avinu. What's he doing? And especially if he's 63, saying, I am your firstborn son. I am, comma, your firstborn son is Esav. Did Rashi mean that's the pshat? Did he think that Yaakov really said it that way? And therefore, technically Yaakov never lied, right? Doesn't it sound very much like technically, David HaMelech never sinned? Technically? Sound familiar? And then Natan Navi says, technically nothing. Right? What does David say? Chatati l'Hashem. Yaakov Avinu also. There's a technically, and then there's actually what's coming in terms of how this will play out in Parshat Vayetze, how many people will deceive him and all the different things that will happen to him, right? But Rashi wants us to think a little bit, is there something very ambivalent about the words that are very much being spoken by him? What kind of a person puts on airs of being someone else with a disguise and maybe, according to Ramban, changing their voice, but then they say, Baruch Hashem, very loud. It's like, but you don't believe, you don't talk that way. You're not in any other dialogue. He crashed him. And you see that Yitzchak didn't understand how Esav could be talking that way, which is why he says, come close, let me feel you. Why was that going to be confirmatory, right? Right? Kol Yaakov Edaim B'dei Esav, just those words. And are you my son? Verse 24. Vayomer ata zebni Esav. Are you my son Esav? Vayomer, and he answered, Ani. What does Rashi say? Lo amar ani Esav, ela ani. He answered, I. Rashi wants us to understand, even as he's saying these things, which are the level of pshat, that's what we're reading in the story. Of course, he was saying things that were not truthful, but somewhere, if in our mind, the mind of, either you want to say from a technical perspective, you want people to say, but I didn't actually literally say, yeah. But on another level, maybe in the mind of Yaakov Avinu, there's this measure of ambivalence, and he's giving clues, he's dropping hints. Give me a kiss, and he smells. It smells like the scent of the field, and then he gives him the bracha. That's Rashi's view. And by the by, we're living at a moment, even till today, where the pendulum swung so far to criticizing the Avot and the Imahot, the whole world, unfortunately, or much of the world of academia. I don't speak about the non-Jewish world of academia, of Jewish academia, Wissenschaft des Judentum, which oftentimes, not always, and there were heroic people who didn't think it always had to be, but many, unfortunately, within that world, left Torah Judaism behind. And part of what they did was they played a teardown game with many of the legacies of the Avot and the Imahot to vilify them, to give other, sometimes totally not Jewish interpretations, certainly not rooted in Torah texts, but things that would show, we'll vilify, right? And we all have to feel and recognize that the net result of that is the defensive stance on the other side of lionizing, to the point sometimes of idolizing and deifying the Avot and the Imahot in unhealthy ways. You understand where it comes from. When every hero there's the genre is called anti-hero. So the sages of the generation mostly said, we're not going to permit such a thing. We simply will not permit it. And why? Because that's not what we learned from our parents and grandparents and from all the ages past. So we can't permit such a thing. Yeah. That is the view in much of the, I would say, in the Welt, in the Yeshivische Welt, Ad Hayom Hazeh, they're very strong about it, and it's understandable. It's not my view, but it is a view, and you have to understand where it comes from. It's part of that we're hunkering down, and we will not let people tear down our great people with their ulterior motives, which are, if they're not laudable, then there's no reason to stick with it, from a religious program. There's something behind this. On the other side, though, we should understand that there were people who, were able to live in a world that appreciated the greatness of the Avot and Imahot without putting them on such a pedestal. Now I'm up to Shelley's other point from earlier today, that they were unable to see them as human beings. I present for your consideration along these lines the words of Samson Rafal Hirsch. Rav Hirsch, I spoke about on Shabbos on our parsha, but I'm dialing back to show you a piece on Rav Hirsch from Perek Yud Bet, from the story when Avram Avinu first goes down to Mitzrayim. There's a famine in the land. Rav Hirsch wrote in German. I don't read German. I don't understand it. So this is the Hebrew translation that I have access to through alhatorah.org, a fine website that catalogs a lot of different words of different chachamim in Hebrew translation here. So Samson Rafal Hirsch wants to understand the view of the Ramban and wants to understand what the Torah is doing to tell us stories about less than perfect Avot and Imahot, and to understand what that means. By the by, I mean, that's the problem with the binary system. They're either so amazing they could do no wrong, or they're so terrible there's nothing we can learn from them. And we're certainly never going to be in the second camp, chas v'chalila. But even in the first camp, is that the best educational method? So the Rav Hirsch engages the Ramban, who I'll remind you says that Avram Avinu sinned in taking Sari Imenu down to Egypt, going down to Egypt. So let's just understand the Rashar Hirsch's approach to the Avot and the Imahot. It's a fascinating piece. We have a few minutes left, so if you indulge me, let's try to learn it together. He writes on the words Vayhira Av Ba'aretz, there was a famine in the land. B'tevot elu anubayim l'sipur ma'aseh. We learn in this story, in these words, about an actual story. At first blush, the fact that Avram goes down to Egypt is strange. Lo ma'at, not a little strange, but rather very strange. Avram azavad ha'aretz shehuftach lo, right? He abandoned the land. Avram abandoned the land that Hashem had promised him. It was promised to him. He didn't trust in God, who even gives food and sustenance in the desert. And at first blush, it seems that he put his wife in danger. Her ethical self, her moral self was placed in danger to save himself. That's the Rashar Hirsch says. That's at first blush. Even if there was no way for us to reconcile all of the questions in this story, which, by the way, not for today, he does try to reconcile all the issues. But he says, let's say hypothetically, we followed the Ramban, quoting the Ramban verbatim, that Avram Avinu sinned a great sin accidentally, in as much as he brought his wife, who was righteous, to the possibility of stumbling and falling in sin on account of his fear lest he be killed, etc. Even his leaving of the land of Israel, which he was commanded not to leave, that was a sin that he committed. Ramban thinks there are two sins in Avram and Sarah leaving the land. We learned about this more in depth. We saw the Ramban. But here's Rashar Hirsch. Af al pichein, even nonetheless, even if we say that, that should not be a source for us of consternation to say such a thing. And here we go. Here's the thesis. The Torah does not want to present our greats as people who are absolutely complete. The Torah does not want to make anyone into a god. Af al af echad ein hi omeret harei lecha kan hashlemut hagmura beish hazeh loveshet elokut surat adam. And not one person does it ever say this is the total complete human being who has godliness in the human form to the highest, to the nth degree. Never says that about anybody. HaTorah enem tziga lefanenu chayei shum adam kedugma mimena nilmad ma'u hatov hayashar. We don't have a single person for whom we could say that we learn from them all that is good and upright. What we should do and not do. When the Torah wants to give us an example of that which should be emulated, there is only one. It never presents a human being in that vein. Only who? Ela Hashem. Only God, Hashem himself, presents himself as worthy of emulation. Vomer saying, Habitu alai, hidamu elai, lechubi drachai, look upon me, emulate me, follow my path. Lo'olam asur lanu lomar ma'aseh zeh bevadai tov yashar, sharei asa utoploni. This action is always good because so-and-so did it. About a person. We never say that. It's forbidden, says the Rashi Hirsch. HaTorah ain't a leket shel maisim tovim. It's the Torah is not a story of good story. It's an anthology of good stories. Maisim tovim. Rather, Yimisaperet Masim Shahayu tells the stories as they happened. Lo b'davka machmat shera'uilin hokach elipnei shema'asem achein karu. Not always to tell us this is what should be done, but rather this is what happened. HaTorah eina ma'alima me'itanu et hashgiot hatauyot v'chushot shel gdolenu. The Torah does not elide, does not hide away from us, right? The errors, the mistakes, the weaknesses of our great ones. V'davka zehu shematbia al sipurea et chotam ha'emet. That is precisely what stamps the stories with the stamp and seal of truth. Haydiani tenet lanu mishkiyatam v'chushatam eina gorat mikomatam shel gedolenu. The fact that we learn about their errors and their weaknesses does not detract from their status as the greats of our nation. Adarabba, au contraire, says Rashi Hirsch. It only raises the level of their lives. It gives us what to learn from their life story. If all we had were these shining exemplars of wholeness and completeness without struggle, without error, without failure, there's no blemish, dofi, there's nothing that's happening that's troubling, etc. We would find out that this was their nature. That's how God made them to be so amazing. And therefore, it's so perfect, so amazing. We could never reach something like that. It's so beyond us. If we had learned about these greats, and they are great, and they are great. Of course, they're the Avot and the Imahot. Chalila, we should say anything about them that is less than how stellar they were. But at the same time, if they were only presented before our eyes as freed of human desire, freed of internal struggle, we would just say the fact that they are on such a level, that was the nature that God gave them. And these things were not attributes that were acquired through personal work. And of course, we would say we can't ever be that. We can't ever get to that level, right? There's no dugma. Now it gives the example, a great example. Let's take as an example the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu. He was very humble. If we did not know that he also had the capacity to become angry, we would have said when Moshe Rabbeinu, before he was born, the Hashem told the Malach, put an extra dose of anivut in him. He'll be the most humble person. We can never be that. He's such a high level, but that's how he was. Davka hitpartsuto shimunamorim. Davka, the moment that he screamed out, his outburst. Listen, you rebellious ones. Manika la'anvnatanuto shel gadluta hamitit. That's what attaches to his humility such greatness. We learn that his humility was acquired through great toil. Shlita atzmit, self-control. V'zikuch atzmi, self-refinement. We all we're all obligated to emulate Moshe Rabbeinu, and it is within our capability to do that. HaTorah gam eina mesaperet af chet oshgia mibli liyadeh otanu al totzeotav. The Torah does not tell us about any sin or error without telling us what its consequences are. Hava nilmad me Ramban. Let's learn from the Ramban. We should not be covering over the greats of spirit and of their ethics, the greats who are greats of spirituality and of ethics. They do not need our limud zchut, means we're taiching up. That's the English translation of limud zchut. We're finding merit. We're tortuously figuring out that they really did no wrong at all. They don't need that. They don't need to suffer for that we have to do that from our vantage point. Emet hi chotam toratenu. Truth is the seal of our Torah. And the Ramban, the Rosh Hirsch goes on. I'm just giving you the end of the piece here. There's much more. He says, makom. All of this would be a plausible explanation. I could say all of this. I could accept it. Ilu be'emet uchrachnu lahaskim l'dar Ramban shechata Avraham Avinu chet gadol bishgaga. If we were compelled to accept what the Ramban says here, chapter 12, that Avraham Avinu sinned a great sin, bishgaga means inadvertently. What the Rosh Hirsch goes on to do is, on its merits, explain why he does not believe, on its merits, that Avraham Avinu sinned at all in going down to Mitzrayim at the time of the famine. But the Rosh Hirsch says, and he goes on to explain why he doesn't think that was true in this case, but he does in this essay very directly say, we don't have to be in the business of covering over the fact that our Avot and Imahot were not perfect. What's their greatness? Is they became more whole people because they struggled, because they toiled, because they worked hard. And we can do it. And the point is, we can do it too. And when we read this story again, I see two perfect Jews before me, more than two, but let's say two. One who says Yaakov Avinu did not sin, chas v'chalila, to say that he did the wrong thing. He didn't lie. Of course, it was hard what he had to do, but he did right. Hashem told him through Rivka Imenu. How did Rivka hear? She knew in her heart of hearts they did right, and there's no sin. And really, he owned the Bechorah because he bought it from his brother. His brother was duplicitous. Everything is on someone else. Yaakov, pure like a malach. I can see a Jew saying that. I understand why. And I could see another Jew. I'm more the second Jew, who says that there are mefarshe hamikra and midrashim and the level of pshat even that's trying to convey to us, even though those words are not untrue, to say that technically he's off the hook and technically this and really that and da. But on another level, it's okay to say that he made mistakes. It's okay to say that Rivka Imenu was the great, most unbelievable tzaddiket, who was also a mother who struggled to know her children and to see how she could relate to them, and that she also had problems. There were also communication problems in the home, and there were also dynamics there. And we don't want to be too harsh judges of Rivka Imenu, even at her moment of this story, because we don't want someone judging us very harshly in the choices that we made as parents, if we were zocha to be parents, or in relationships with our own family members or whatnot. And we say to ourselves, our family's so complicated. So we look at this family and say, oh, it's so complicated. And we say, this is our family. And this is the story that's told. And like the Rosh Hirsch says, that's the chotam shel emet. Like Karen wrote in, great people are great because they have flaws. They are not great because of their flaws. They are great in spite of their flaws. A perfect way to end. Let that be the coda for today. I went over time today, but I thought it was so important. And Shelley, your comments and questions so appreciated, because they're right on point where I was going with trying to understand, like, you don't have to go and read the parsha and say, what are the Chachamim making a story up? You just read the pshat. Yes, read the pshat. See the greatness of these people, davka, in the fact that they were not malachei hasharet, but human beings. And their greatness was davka grappling with these issues and how complicated the Jewish family was and still is today. Okay, and yet we continue to continue. Well, that's it for today. Wish everyone a great rest of the week. And Thursday we'll be back for the regularly scheduled shir at 9:30 in the morning. We'll talk about the chaos on the national level, but you have to wait for that for Thursday. I'd count for today. Have a great day. Take care.